Welcome to our podcast, The Intended Parent, all about surrogacy. We want to open up the conversation in this space and also bust some of the myths that you might have heard about it. We're going to share our stories and those of others with heart and honesty. And not only do we want to educate, but also empower those who find themselves on this route to parenthood. We hope you enjoy listening.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, it's so nice to have you, especially at a time when the landscape for surrogacy is changing so much. So could you just tell us a little bit more about yourself and your background, projects that you're currently working on, and give us a brief overview of the laws surrounding surrogacy as they stand at the moment?
So I am Natalie, as you said, and I'm a partner at Burgess Bee. I deal with all areas of family law, but I have a specific and very special interest in surrogacy and fertility law. It's very much what lights me up, I think. You know, I really enjoy helping people create their families. So this area of the law is it's very niche, and it doesn't apply to everybody, of course. You know, not as much as divorce and children law and things like that. But it is a very nice, happy area of the law, which I very much enjoy dealing with. And then, as you say, I'm the co-host of Infertility in the City. So I also have a passion in helping people through their fertility journey and how it impacts on their career. So that's what our podcast is about. And I'm my firm's fertility officer. And it's through that role that I've been able to help not only people in my firm navigate fertility issues whilst working in high-profile careers, but also lots of other law firms are taking on including this type of role in their organisation, having policies, signing up to the Fertility Workplace Pledge. So it's really changing the way I think law firms in particular, but also other companies are supporting their employees go through fertility treatment. So I have that passion as well.
And it's so important, isn't it? Like, we've had a conversation on previous podcasts, like Fran, you were having to inject yourself in between parents' evening, and I didn't share at all with my employer, and this fertility in the workplace is such an important conversation for everyone's experience.
Definitely.
We're at the Intended Parent. We are trying to do everything we can to make surrogacy more accessible for IPs, and part of that is the podcast that we're recording here, and we in the later on in this year are going to be launching our first online learning courses, online learning course, which the first one is preparing for surrogacy, and what we want to do in there is to give our IPs everything they need to make the decision that's right for them, be that agency, be that indie, if they need a TS journey or a GS journey, equip them with the toolkit they need to set off on the right path. And what we want to make sure we don't do is cut we don't want to cut any corners, because we all know that when you go into these journeys prepared, they have a much better outcome than if you're sort of just rushing through a surrogacy journey. Back when Fran and I went on our individual journeys, we actually didn't get legal advice because we used a straightforward agreement, and we were doing quite straightforward journeys in the UK. But it feels like things are changing, and it feels like people maybe do need to get legal advice when they're going through surrogacy journeys. I guess what would you say is the benefit of getting that advice, and how does it differ, the need to get legal advice, dependent on where you're going through your journey? Like if you're going on an international journey and have to bring your child back, or if you're going to get pregnant overseas and then come back, what degree of legal support do you think IPs should be getting, and when should they be getting it?
At the very minimum, I think everybody contemplating going through surrogacy should have a one-off meeting with a family law solicitor in the jurisdiction that they're having go through their surrogacy journey. But not only that, if you're international, you need your advice there as well. And the reason for this is because your surrogate will be your child's legal parent. She's the birth mother, so she will always be the legal parent. And then who the second legal parent is will depend on various factors. So you at least one of you may not be the legal parent. And so you need to go through a court process once the baby is born in this country. And that will apply even if you go to a jurisdiction like the USA, where you as the intended parents will go on the birth certificate as mother and father and be legal parents in accordance with that jurisdiction. if you're intending to come back to this country and bring up your child here, you will not be recognised as the legal parents, and that has huge impact on things like inheritance, especially if you don't know. If you don't know that your child is not your legal child, if you just left your will to my son or my daughter, there would be a problem there because they're not your legal children. So it's very, very important to go through the parental order process to establish that legal relationship. And not everybody does. And the reason why they may not go through that process is perhaps they may not meet the various eligibility criteria. So, and people will create their families however they can and not necessarily follow the legal process. And of course, you're not required to. You're not required to go through the parental order process, but it is absolutely recommended. So you have to know what the eligibility criteria are before embarking on that journey, so that you know that when the baby's here, we've done everything we can to tick all those boxes. And there will be some boxes that you can tick right now, before you go ahead on the journey. Other things will be those boxes that you tick once you've had the baby. So the consent, for example, the consent of the surrogate, that can't come before post 6 weeks from birth. So that is something that it follows afterwards. And sometimes things change. So you may be eligible when you start your journey, but because it's quite a long process, perhaps life might have changed. So your eligibility criteria might not be met. So, and as lawyers, we can usually help at that stage to help you go through the parental order process. And actually going through that process as well, I meet lots of intended parents who, they spent a lot of money by the time they get to this point and don't necessarily want to spend any more money on lawyers, and I completely get it. So a lot of them will do it themselves. And when it's not contested, it's usually fairly straightforward. You just need to know what you're doing, what the court is expecting you to put in your application form, put in your statement, to understand the parental order reporter process. And some clients will say, right, well, we don't need you to represent us in court, but if you can just look at our statement, can you just check that I've done all this right? So we can provide help in the background, so that it gives people who perhaps have been on an independent journey, who want to still continue to do it themselves, gives them that bit of confidence that they've seen a solicitor, they know they've ticked all the boxes in their statement, and it should be fairly straightforward going to court. So I help in lots of different ways. So from the initial meetings, definitely do that before you start on your journey, and then either in the background or like full on, we do everything for you.
The Fertility Show 2024 is back at London's Olympia on the 18th and 19th of May. With expert talks, interviews and panels with the world's leading fertility experts, plus over 70 exhibitors featuring clinics, experts, support groups, advice, holistic care, community and much more, the show, renowned for its live events, is the only place that connects you to all of these people all at once and in a safe space. Over the 2 days, there'll be 3 seminar rooms hosting Q&As, conversations and panel talks. Topics include fertility testing, diagnosis, egg and sperm donation, how to choose a clinic and optimising your success rates with IVF. There's also the Let's Talk Fertility Lounge and the Wellbeing Hub. We'll be there on both Saturday and Sunday. Tickets are still at 15% off, so we hope to see you there.
Yeah, it's really interesting because, like I said, we didn't do it. We did do it DIY. But the whole point of setting up the courses is to sort of learn from our journeys and to give our IPs what they need to. And like you say, some people might have the affordability to have a lawyer with them every step of the way, and that's totally fine. But we hope even through the courses and like through partnering with companies like yours, or having you on board as one of our voices from the expert panel, we can educate people on what they must do to make sure that they get that parental order, so that they haven't gone on a double donation journey and think they're going to come back to the UK and then be legal parents of the children. So I guess there are different ways of getting your legal advice dependent on the budget and your circumstances, and hopefully through the courses and through expert advice we can support our community when they need us as well.
So many people actually that I think listen to this podcast don't know anything, which is, one of the reasons why it's important to get that sort of legal advice. But often what they have heard are things that have been sensationalized in the media, one of the things that you deal with is surrogacy when it goes wrong. So if it does go wrong, how often does that actually happen? And what are the reasons that that it does go wrong, that people should be wary about?
It is rare. It is rare, and the ones that you hear about in the media are usually the ones that have gone wrong for various reasons. But I've dealt with 2 cases where the surrogate's changed her mind, and you know, we always tell people it is very rare, but it does happen. It does happen, and she does have the right to change her mind because she is the legal parent. So it's about managing expectations, and so the surrogate knowing what rights she has and the intended parents knowing what rights they have. But the hope is, of course, that you guys will become friends and just be able to trust each other, and you're going through this with your eyes wide open, with similar expectations, and those types of journeys go through no problem. You guys probably had that and didn't need legal help, and it's a non-event, like completely normal. That's what we're all expecting. But there'll be bumps in the road for other people, and that's where the wheels can come off, to just extend that analogy. So and in my cases it was non-agency, so people had met on Facebook and they used a traditional surrogate. So so your listeners probably know this, but traditional surrogate is where the surrogate has used her own egg and therefore is biologically related to the child she's carrying and giving birth to, and that you know, will likely in some cases create this bond that the surrogate is hoping when she enters into this agreement is not going to happen, but then in these cases did happen. So and then you've got
Was that for both cases?
Right, both cases, yeah, completely separate, you know, a couple of years apart, but that's what's happened.
Were those TS cases that had gone through clinics or had gone through home insems?
Home. Yeah. I love all your abbreviation. Indie, home insems. Love it.
We do some YouTube shorts if we start using like, you know, acronyms that people don't quite understand. But what we're just saying there is that, you know, traditional surrogacy is when the egg comes from the surrogate. There are 2 ways to do that. You know, you could do a home insemination, which means your surrogate is going to get pregnant at home. The one thing Fran and I always say is that if you are going through a traditional surrogacy journey, we would advocate you do it through a clinic. You know, even if you're using your donor, your surrogate's egg essentially as your donor egg, it means that you're going to have the counselling before, you're going to have all your screening done before, you're going to have to meet all of the HFEA guidelines before someone gets pregnant, and that maybe would protect to a degree. Well, I think it would give more protection than a home insemination, and hopefully therefore, you know, avoid
definitely with the implications counselling. Definitely, because, you know, if that's missing, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And often, you know, you may have surrogates that really want to help and don't quite you know, appreciate what's coming down the line, you know, and then people's feelings change, and we're all human at the end of the day. So so it is possible, but the hope from all the IPs I speak to is that they choose a surrogate who is definitely on the same page as the IPs, and but there's only so much you can do in terms of safeguarding that. But I think if you're just from personal experience of doing this work, gestational surrogacy tends to be on the safer side because she is carrying a child that's not biologically related to her, and that's yeah.
And for context, I guess, when you say you've dealt with 2, how many is that out of?
Ooh, it's a good question. But
roughly.
So
like 284.
So I've been a family solicitor for 16 years, and I've been doing surrogacy itself for about 5. So not the entirety of my career, but it's in those 5 years I've had 2, and they are, you know, and I've got lots of colleagues in other firms where it's not happened to them. So, so you know, it is very rare. I've just been lucky, I guess, that I've had those cases. So, yeah, but it's one of the first things that IPs will want to know: can she change her mind? And on the flip side, I also advise surrogates, or, on a one-off basis. You provide the advice. I won't then advise the IPs, but so I'm able to advise the surrogate about the process that she's going to have to go through, and letting her know what that she is a legal parent, and to go through that process. She'll need to go through that process of the parental order to then not be the legal parent. So I sort of see it both sides, and there's a lot of surrogates I'm like, don't worry, I'm not changing my mind.
Yeah.
I'm not going to do that.
Conversation, isn't it? Because everyone thinks that the surrogate's going to change her mind, but we both said, like, for me on Ina, on my very first visit, our very first meeting, she was like, my biggest fear is that you change your mind, because I don't want to be a mum again. And I don't want to raise this child, but legally I will have to if you change your mind.
Yeah.
So it's a double-edged sword, and it's making sure you're always looking at both sides of the coin, isn't it? And I remember at school we used to say this thing like prevention is better than cure, and that's like with your health and with with all sorts of things, and that's the same for this journey. Like, we're here to, I guess, through the podcast, through our courses, through your work, and whichever route people take, it's make sure you get all the resources you need to prevent it from going wrong, because it's better that you at the beginning what you're all working towards, than you get 3/4 of the way through or all the way through and you think, oh right, that wasn't what I signed up for, and now we've got to go through this messy legal situation.
Yep. Exactly.
But prevention is better than cure. The Law Commission, we have recently had, the release of the draft bill for the revised sort of laws around surrogacy in the UK. What, in your opinion, were the headline takeaways, and how do you think the new legislation is going to affect the current status quo?
So I suppose following on from what we were just talking about, the biggest headline for me is the fact that the court, under the recommendations, will be allowed to veto the surrogate's lack of consent. And had that been available when I was going through these cases, then there wouldn't have been these big cases, because we would have just been dealing with welfare, and the court then would have been able to say, right, well, the surrogate has said no to the parental order. Right now, that means no parental order. So if surrogate does not consent, you don't get your parental order, and you have to fix it another way. So, for example, a child arrangements order, but that doesn't create legal parentage. You won't get a birth certificate on that. It's not a solution, I don't think. But it's just to hold the ring. But if the law changes, and we are many years away from that, but if the law does change, it will bring it in line with adoption. So in adoption, if the birth parents don't consent, the court does have the power to make the order anyway if the lifelong best interest of the child requires it. So the Law Commission wants surrogacy law to follow adoption law, so that the court then has the power to look at welfare. What's in this child's best interest? Is it in their best interest for this parental order to be made, even though the surrogate does not consent? And then it's sort of balancing. You've got two, obviously, sets of adults with conflicting wishes, but the court will look at what's in the child's best interests, bigger picture, lifelong best interests as well. So for me, that's huge, and I'm very glad that is part of the process, or recommendation, sorry. But of course, we've got to go through Parliament and get the law changed first. So who knows what's going to happen there? People have very sometimes polarized views about surrogacy. So there is, the fact that in this country we've always had the ability for the surrogate to change her mind, which is not the same as in other countries where she can't and she's not a legal parent. Here we do respect the autonomy of the surrogate, allow her to keep the child that she's birthed. And when I say keep the child, I mean not consent to the parental order. Again, there will still be a welfare issue to be dealt with at the courts, but yeah. So that depends on whether society at that time will find that palatable. I'm hoping that it will, because of the clients that I have. And then being able to be the legal parent from birth. I mean, that's huge as well, because that's never happened before. So the Law Commission has basically set out two different pathways. So the parental order pathway, which we're currently on with a few tweaks, and then this new pathway, which you have to comply with a lot of safeguarding checks before conception. So at the moment, a lot of that checks are done post-birth. So the baby's here, and now the court is going to look at welfare. You'll have your CAFCAS appointed as a parental order reporter. They'll come to your home. They will, check baby safe, speak to you about your intentions and all that kind of stuff, and prepare a report and recommend whether or not the parental order should be made. That's not going to happen now on the new system, the new recommendations. Instead, for you to be eligible for the new pathway, there's going to be enhanced criminal records checks. You have to have implications counselling. You have to get legal advice. There will need to be a welfare check. And I asked the Law Commission who they're expecting to carry out this welfare check, because currently it's CAFCAS. But it won't be CAFCAS anymore. It will either be the RSO, the Registered Surrogacy Organisation, or the clinic. So, because the clinic have to do a welfare of the child test anyway. But of course, what they're doing is they're thinking, well, will this child be okay? This child doesn't exist yet. So it's a bit of an odd one to sort of have people who in an RSO aren't social workers or anything like that, and neither are they in the clinics, deciding on welfare. But then
and not necessarily accredited in a way to make that decision, or they don't have that professional background to make that decision. I mean, this is something that Fran and I will go off tangent a little bit, but this is something we talk about a lot, because it definitely feels like at the moment the RSO is going to be, if you're an agency who's already up and running, it's natural that you'll look to become an RSO. Our work here is a lot of it is to do with independent surrogacy, and who's going to pick up that RSO work for anyone who goes through independent, because we don't want the legislation to mean, or the change in law to mean, that this whole community of independent surrogacy gets wiped out overnight, because there isn't anyone to take them through this new pathway, because there isn't a registered surrogacy organisation. And we've toyed with it. We've considered, would we do it under the intended parent? But we don't feel qualified to.
You're no less qualified than everyone else that works in a surrogacy agency right now, and you are intended parents. You've lived it, you've breathed it, and Mike and Wes at My Surrogacy Journey also intended parents who lived and breathed it. So there's no reason why you couldn't. But what I would say is it's a hell of a lot of work. From reading the report, there is a huge amount. So basically, the RSOs are now going to be the gatekeepers to this new pathway, and they have a serious job. So you have to be licensed by the HFEA. Then if you get into trouble, you'll be sanctioned by the HFEA. It will be the job of the RSO to sign the regulated surrogacy statement. So that's a statement that says, yes, these intended parents have met all of this safeguarding criteria. They are now eligible to move forward and have their baby and be the legal parents at birth. So it's a big responsibility to do that. I think the Law Commission have also said that if independent people who have met outside of an agency want to still use the new pathway, they will just need to then go to an RSO and say, can you tick all this off? But I just wonder whether RSOs will take them on at that point, because they may have matched, but not. I don't know. Maybe the surrogate hasn't gone through psychological testing and all that kind of stuff. So that RSO that's had no involvement in your match may not be comfortable signing you off on the new pathway. So if you are going full independent with no RSO, you'll have to go through the parental order process at the back end. So, and I also think, the RSOs are probably going to have to raise their prices, because this is a lot more work than what they currently doing. And I know they're still not for profit and not commercial, but still,
someone's got to pay for the hours it takes, right? And that's what Fran and I had that conversation. One, it's the amount of time it's going to take, and two, it's the responsibility. I've never been someone who works in child welfare, and I would hate to think if I got it wrong, the implications of that. I'm not sure we sign up to it, and what our thoughts where we can read what the framework is and what the requirements are, and like you say, potentially we become someone in the independent space who offer everyone a checklist, and
Mhm.
you have to meet this, and then hand over to a clinic or to an agency who
But
has
would
the
you
RSO.
be independent though if you became an RSO? It'd no longer be an independent journey, would it? It would be you'd be an agency if you did it.
No, we would. Well, that's the thing. We would need to understand what the RSO requirements are, but we've got we don't want this to become an agency, because we still want people to meet independently on
Right.
forums or come with people who have already matched. Like,
Mhm.
that's the whole point of our business, is that we don't want to be, we don't really, we're not going to offer matching services, because we don't have some, that's not where we're at. We're sort of saying, well, we went through, Facebook based independent journeys where we met people on Facebook. We took the advice from that wonderful community and went on these journeys that were very straightforward for us.
Mm.
And for a lot of people that is the case, so we're like, well, you can carry on doing that, but what we can do is, like, the analogy I made at the fertility show was like, at the moment it feels like you arrive, you're in London and you want to go to Manchester, and someone gives you a paper A to Z and you have to find your way, and you'll take some wrong turns and stuff. Or you can get, flag an Uber, which is the equivalent of an agency, and they'll get you there and they'll hold your hand, and to a different degree depending on the fee you're paying. Or you're going to get in the car, you're going to drive it yourself, but you're going to put Google Maps on and you're going to be directed. And I guess we sit in the middle there. We're not saying we're going to hold your hand every step of the way, but through the courses, through the podcast, through the community that we have created, we will offer a higher degree of support than Fran and I ever had.
Right.
But so that means that whilst we are a not-for-profit organisation, we're not an agency. We could apply for an RSO, but I'm not sure.
I think when we talked about the RSO role a little bit, what we talked about is it may potentially be possible if you could outsource each of the different components. So if you could check that they've had a DBS check, if you can outsource to a social worker, somebody who has, I guess, the role that Kafkas would have done in the past, if you could outsource each one of those components, then it may be possible. But otherwise, I find it difficult to know how anything other than an agency with the with the sort of the money and the contacts behind them, how any other than an agency, potentially a law firm or a clinic, could actually take on that role.
I mean, a clinic might. A fertility clinic might decide that it's worth them looking into this, because they'll have, infrastructure, and, they already do like the welfare checks and things like that. So I can see potentially clinics thinking this is a good model, but clinics are also commercial businesses, whereas you can't run it commercially for an RSO. It has to be not for profit. So will they be bothered? Don't know. I don't think law firms will. We won't touch it with a barge pole. But yeah. So I mean, it's interesting. They've the way that the Law Commission have done it is so that, and I don't think some of the agencies that are currently offering these things, I don't think they were expecting to have such a big role come the Law Commission's recommendations. So that everybody's going to have to get regulation ready. But remember as well that we're years off this. I mean, we've got a lot of us talk about it as if we've got the recommendations now. This is how the law is going to change. It may not. It may never come to pass. And even if it did, it may be in a completely different form to what the Law Commission have actually set out in their draft bill. It's got to go through Parliament. Everybody's got to debate it and all sorts. I think what people can do is, if they are in support of surrogacy reform, is write to their MPs and let them know that whenever this potentially comes up, it won't until there's a new government, but to say, I'm in support of this. Can you please support it? Because it's going to need cross-party support, I think, to get it through. It's such a divisive subject, and also at the very bottom of the list of priorities. So it's going to need.
It's so small in the grand scheme of the like stuff that goes through Parliament as well, isn't it? Whilst it's massively important to those of us who are choosing this path to parenthood, in the context of births around overall in the UK, we're still talking of a small percentage, which makes it tricky. And I think the other thing we were talking about when we went through the RSO document and in other conversations we've had, is that actually it's it's quite restrictive on expenses and you know the transparency needed. And actually, are surrogates going to sign up to that, or are they just going to say, do you know what, like, I'm not signing up to this, I'm happy to go down the old pathway? What would that look like? You know,
Well,
they
you say that,
can't.
but even though they may not want this new pathway, the Law Commission is recommending the parental order process be reformed
Right.
as well. So your expenses, you should be so the expenses recommendations will apply to not only the new pathway but the old one as well. So if the law passed, then surrogates would not be able to add a bit of their food shopping, not allowed to add a bit of their rent as kind of like, cost of living, not allowed. It's prohibited. You're not allowed to add those. And which is a bit weird because the Law Commission want to encourage more surrogates in the UK so that intended parents use surrogates in the UK and don't go abroad. And currently we have reasonable expenses, and reasonable is not defined, and everybody's reasonable is different. And as long as you're not massively overpaying and you can, show your receipts and everything, and it's around about the figures that the courts are usually using, that you won't fall foul of the reasonable expenses. But the recommendations are, well, these are permitted payments, these are prohibited payments, and then anything that's not on the permitted is prohibited anyway. So, and there's mandatory payments as well. So you'll have to pay for things like life insurance for your surrogate. Which I think probably most people do now anyway, but it'll be a requirement. And also the method of payment. So whereas now you could say, right, my expenses are probably going to be about £12,000. So, divide it by, 10 months, and this is what you'll pay me this each month. And that's my expenses. Whereas the Law Commission's recommendations are that the surrogate will have to pay out the money first, produce the receipt, get reimbursed, other than a small float, for expediency, I suppose. So that's a whole other way.
I was going to say, how does that work? Because I know that in terms of the expenses that we paid, the majority of that covered the topping up the maternity pay after
Right.
the girls were born. That was the biggest chunk of the money. So how does that work with it, with that? Because there's not necessarily going to be a receipt,
No.
and it's going to mean that actually, as a surrogate, you're a little bit worried that it's not until the baby's born that 80% of those expenses haven't even at that point,
Is that actually a permitted expense now?
I mean,
I would have thought so.
replacing income, so income during pregnancy, I've actually not heard of people topping up a maternity allowance for a surrogate, because surrogates are entitled to their full maternity pay. But I suppose if they've got a job where
more like, if you I don't know, let's say you get paid £1,500 a month normally, and then as a result of having a baby and you're on maternity leave, your employer doesn't give you 100% of your pay, so now your pay has dropped. For the first 3 months, it's dropped to £700, just like figures out of there. So what the majority of our expenses went on was making that up to the £1,500. So Gina wasn't out of pocket by having a child, because she worked at a firm that didn't necessarily
Wasn't giving
have a
full
great
pay.
wasn't giving her full pay.
Gosh. But of course, if she was having a baby herself, there wouldn't be anybody to top that up. You'd be stuck with whatever your employer was giving you, which, I've had employers that don't pay maternity very well. How were you able to put that in your statement when you went to do your parental order?
I think we just put like topping up. That's how that. The first surrogacy journey we went through, I didn't actually see any of the statements. It was in the second journey when Kafkas gave me a copy of the statements that Gina had provided, and that was the first time I'd actually seen the breakdown. But it also, I guess, is in discussions on the forums and things, when people are I think when you first come into surrogacy and you sort of go, whoa, how does it cost that much, like, you know, expenses wise to have a child? If it costs that much to have a child, how on earth are people actually doing it? And I think that often is the answer, that the biggest bulk of that comes from topping up that pay.
Also,
or other things that, like Nat's saying, like a proportion of rent or a proportion of mortgage. That's if that's now being prohibited.
So the Law Commission is saying that the surrogate should not be out of pocket, but she should also not be in profit. So anything that they would have to pay for themselves without the pregnancy, they're not entitled to charge the IPs. Now, I can see the expenses being really good for IPs because, as you say, now you've got clarity on what is allowed, what is not allowed. If that became law and you needed the RSO to sign off that you hadn't paid more than that to be able to get your legal parentage, there's going to be a tighter sort of regulation, I think, on the expenses. But as you say, Fran, I think it might put off surrogates because at the end of the day, whilst we are an altruistic system, and this might be controversial opinion, but I think there is some payment there. You know, ultimately there is some payment to surrogates, and also I think there should be.
I've had this conversation so many times. You know, like again, like my two journeys, there was a very big difference between the expenses of my first and the expenses of my second. And the second was very top end of what we call the UK sort of average. And then we were overlaying things like C-section costs, multiple birth costs, all of these, you know, all of these things came up, and I was like, wow, that second journey cost us a lot of money. And it's fine. I don't begrudge having paid that at all. I would pay it in a heartbeat to have my children. But what I think we need to be clear on is that that's not full expenses. There's a degree of compensation within there. And again, I'm okay with that. It's a strange sort of
legally that's not allowed though.
I know, but there's many of us who are, aren't there? I mean, we absolutely you know, put money definitely on our first journey for a holiday, you know, for a family holiday. We're like that one.
Yeah, that's now a permitted expense. So a recuperative holiday, they've been very clear about that. Modest gifts as well, you can pay that. So so there's a tiny element of, like, you know, the surrogate getting a little bit extra. But otherwise she should not be getting any more. But you know, the way I see it as well, and this is entirely my personal opinion, but the surrogates are putting their lives at risk and on hold for 9 months. So, you know, pregnancy, as I know full well, is dangerous. It can be extremely risky. And also, your clinic's getting paid, your lawyers are getting paid. Why doesn't the surrogate get paid? So, but, you know, it's all wrapped up in this sort of thing of motherhood, of, you know, being a mother to a child, that we find it a little bit icky that that if we pay a surrogate for the baby, it's like they're selling their baby, and nobody wants that, of course, and that's not what anybody's doing.
I think it's so difficult because I think there are so many vulnerable parties.
Yeah.
In this, and it's, you know, I know that, like Karina, you say, you know, I'd pay that over, it was worth it. I mean, ultimately, we'd pay everything we had to keep our children. You know, every penny that I you know, that I own, I would pay to keep my children and to have had my children. So in some ways, it's you know, I mean, where do you go with that? Because I still feel that, you know, we are very vulnerable and we need protecting as well, and it's about then getting that balance right. Yes, there should be some compensation, but at the same time, it's about getting that balance right, because once you start going down that route, and then it becomes the US model, suddenly, you know, I don't think we wouldn't have been able to do it.
Yeah, it's really tricky, and it's a bit like, so with I've lost my train of thought. I was about to say something there. No, it's gone. Like Natalie was saying, like, you know, people get paid, like agencies get paid. Well, agencies are not for profit, but they're at least, you know, there's some cost being covered there. There's, you know, lawyers, clinics. We all talk about how clinics are just, you know, you walk in and your wallet's empty from the minute you open the door. Even like donation, like, you know, a donor's getting compensated for giving that genetic material that creates the child. Why shouldn't a surrogate receive some form? It's such a complex conversation.
I think we've always said that. I think that it's about the transparency. My issue was always putting down for X, Y, and Z that was never actually ever going to be used. Was the issue. So it was about the transparency. It was about saying, I'm losing out here, I'm losing out here, I'm losing out here. And actually, I again believe that there should be some level of compensation, not an indefinite level of compensation. I think, again, keeping it altruistic, but also realizing, like you said, that a surrogate is putting her life at risk. She's doing something that is absolutely huge and going to have so much of an impact on her life. And so there should have, my personal feelings is there should have been some compensation, and then it would have allowed the rest of it to have been more transparent, rather than it was just all of that. Oh, I'm going to put this down, I'm going to put this down, I'm going to put this down to make it up to this amount of money, but actually this
we
and this
didn't
is
even
never
get
going to
that.
happen.
We just got the flat number for the whole journey, like, you know, however many tens of thousands, we got that and no breakdown. So like I said, if it would be clearer, if it was, even if it was like expenses plus 15%, your compensation as a percentage of your expenses, it would allow the IP to see what's in the granularity within the expenses, and then acknowledge that there's a degree of compensation on top of that.
And it's funny you're saying compensation and not saying commercial. I was at a surrogacy forum in Copenhagen last month, and there was a lot of talk about the labels that we give to things, and there were people from America, and you know, they have a commercial system, and then you have Canada where they have an altruistic, and then we have altruistic, but there was a lot of sort of pushback on the word commercial, and that it compensated is much better because it's a compensation for services rather than, you know, commercial isn't the opposite of altruistic. So because all surrogates are doing it altruistically at the end of the day. So so having that element, and I think when the surrogates were asked about their sort of just views on this for the Law Commission's consultation, surrogates said they didn't want to get paid, and you know, get paid as in have an element of compensation. But the couple of, you know, those cases that I was telling you about where they fell out, one of them fell out over money. So it is possible to have a completely different sort of power imbalance between the two sets of people, and money can muddy the waters. So and you know, we don't like talking about it, and it always feels a bit weird, and especially if like your surrogate is your sister and stuff, like, you know, how do you manage that type of relationship, and then if you do fall out, you know, that's all a complete nightmare. So calling a spade and saying, right, well, I want to pay you for what you're doing for me, because that makes me feel more comfortable. But we need to get over this idea that, you know, surrogates don't deserve to be paid, that they should want to do this out of the goodness of their heart. Because actually it's hard. It's really hard to go through IVF procedures and be pregnant, and then be pregnant for 9 months and then give birth, and if you've got multiples, your C-section, and then all the stuff that happens to you after that. You know, that is that's why there's not that many surrogates doing this, because it takes a very, very particular kind of person, I think, to want to do that for someone else, and they are amazing. But I personally feel that they should be compensated for that.
It's you know, it's funny as well. It's like it's like, how do you put a cost on certain things as well? So you know, having to have a hysterectomy because you've gone through a really traumatic birth, or having to have a C-section rather than a normal delivery, putting costs on those things is really difficult. And because ultimately, you know, it might be that your husband or partner has to stay at home and look after you, and therefore lose a little bit of time off work, but it feels like that's not enough. That if you've had to go through some sort of procedure like that, then that actually should then have had that should have some compensation as well. But it's protecting the vulnerability and of both parties, and stopping IPs from being exploited too, because you know, we have always thought, and it's much easier to say this now we've come out the other end, that this is this is somewhere where IPs can be exploited.
Yeah.
Because they will do anything to have a family, because they've come from places where
we definitely found that in the second journey, and Fran and I had this conversation because I'd done one. The second time round, I realised how little control I had on the first one, and how I wish I had the courage to speak out. And then on the second one, I was like, I remember sitting in Fran's living room, and I'm like, well, I can't have all of these and have an open checkbook because we don't have that money. And we went and we I don't even know if this is allowed now, but we had a cap on expenses because we were like, this is the cap, because if your total number plus every other eventuality happens, this is going to spiral out of control. And that was the only way I could sort of protect ourselves. But I would have liked it if someone else is protecting me rather than having to put that in an agreement. So I feel like right now the balance isn't quite right with the new framework. It's not going to make it more appealing for people to do surrogacy in the UK. It's not going to make surrogates come forward because they might feel like they're not necessarily going to the expenses aren't going to be what they have been in the past, especially if they were covering parts of their bills and stuff like that. So
I agree.
It's tricky. But the other issue is that the new framework also, wouldn't allow for overseas travel. And my triplets were conceived in Cyprus, although it was a UK surrogate. We got pregnant in Cyprus and came back to the UK for the birth. Now, I think if I understand it right, that's not permissible under the new framework.
Yeah, you have to do it through a UK clinic. So that wouldn't be.
And that brings the whole reason we went to Cyprus is because you don't
cheaper.
get donors of colour.
Right.
You don't get
and IVF is cheaper abroad. Yeah.
And that wasn't our issue. I have to say, the reason we went overseas was to find the egg donor that worked for our family, and to have a donor that we did known donation where we could meet her on the day of collection. Now, that's not something that's offered in the UK. So now IPs are having to make a decision that, okay, well, now I'm going to have to go through a whole different type of donation journey. I'm not going to be able to meet my donor, which has lifelong implications for the children. We've just interviewed someone about this very conversation, that they really wished they had contact with the donor for their child's sake. I'm fortunate that I did have contact, but it means that having done that, I wouldn't be allowed to go through the new framework.
Yeah. But you do then have the parental order process to fall back on.
Exactly. So then you're just going to end up going back to the old process, which again is fine, really. It's a non-issue, which is Fran and I keep going around like, oh yeah, should we carry on with this business? Well, actually, yeah, because you know what? Maybe a whole load of people are still just going to use the old framework because
I think so.
It wasn't as broken as people thought it was.
I mean, it's sort of tinkered around the edges, so it's given us some good things, and then it hasn't gone far enough. So, like, double donation's not in there. It was in the consultation. So, and I've had inquiries recently from several women actually who want to create their family through surrogacy, but have to use double donation. They're doing it abroad because obviously not allowed to do it here. Oh well, no, if they were carrying a donated egg and gave birth, that would be fine. But if they can't give birth, then they would need surrogacy. And so that means that they wouldn't be entitled to apply for their parental order. That's not going to stop women doing this, okay? They're still going to go and create their families. Of course they are. We've got one life and we want to be parents. So so the law is going to have to figure it out at the back end.
What happens in those circumstances if
adoption.
someone does do that?
Adoption.
Right.
So
that was the saddest story from the fertility show. There was a lady that came over a number of times, and she was in tears, and I just felt like she she's in a situation where she would have had to have used double donation and surrogacy or adoption, but every adoption agency that she was going to were turning her away, and it felt like it just felt so unfair. My heart was breaking for this woman, that there just wasn't these options. It's really sad to have not seen that as a possibility. Was there anything else that you were slightly frustrated perhaps that it didn't make it?
Yeah, the international side of things. So so about half of parental orders that are made in the UK each year are from internationals. And I think if if IPs have the money, then there is a better system out there than ours. If you go to the US and you have the money to spend on the US, you will have access to fantastic IVF treatment centres, a lot more surrogates, it's quicker, and your legal parents over there. And we were hoping that, similar to adoption in Hague countries, that if you're adopted legally in one country, you're recognised in this country if you're on that list. Hoping that perhaps there would be a similar list for countries where you have had children born through surrogacy. They mentioned that again in the consultation, did not appear in the final recommendations. And again, I asked the Law Commission why that was. And it's essentially because, like in places like California, where we know it's robust and we know it's ethical, they have their checks and balances. They don't have every single surrogate come through. It's a very small amount because they do their screening and things like that. It's because it's a commercial system, so it doesn't fit with our altruistic system. They can't guarantee that there's been no exploitation because a surrogate's been paid. So they basically gone, oh, we're not doing that anymore. So completely missed opportunity there. So it will mean that all those people that potentially might have they may decide to come into the UK now, but like I say, if people are going to be going abroad, and we think they probably still will be because time is very much a factor, that they won't benefit from these new changes when they come in. If they come
those
in,
people would still need to come back and come through the old parental order system.
Yeah. So they'll still need to make a court
interesting
application.
Yeah, we find that there's we hear a lot of chat, especially in the groups, about people going overseas, and I guess I hadn't really fully explored the implications of someone giving birth to a child born through surrogacy overseas, and how does that work in terms of getting a passport and getting them over here? And yes, the US and Canada, there's a clear way of doing it, but we're finding that more people are talking about going to Mexico to have their babies through surrogacy because of affordability. We had someone on who's had their child from surrogacy in India a while ago, and we know that door got shut, and it becomes very tricky if it suddenly shuts down. How do we then get these babies home? And we can see sort of Georgia and places like that where maybe the ethically you're a bit worried about what's going on, and then it gets shut down overnight and people are pregnant and we don't know how to bring babies home, and that's, I guess, where you need a really good lawyer on your side to make sure your baby is home. But what those journeys wouldn't be able to come through the new framework, but also, like, even if someone is going on that journey, what's your advice to them before they choose an international journey that isn't the US or Canada?
Definitely take legal advice in that jurisdiction and immigration advice here. So if you're choosing an outside of the UK jurisdiction, you have to understand how you can get home. You need to understand what passport your child is entitled to, and if they're not entitled to a passport of that country, then you need to figure out how you can apply for British passport. So immigration is a very specialised area. It's not my area. I don't give advice on it. I refer it out, and I also think it's part of the puzzle. So when you have your initial meeting with a family lawyer to find out if you're eligible for the parental order, you should also have a one-off meeting with an immigration lawyer to talk about your exit process. There will be different decisions to make depending on your jurisdiction. So, for example, you may find it's better to have a single surrogate than a married one. The reason being is that the biological father, who's British, will be able to pass on British nationality to the child because he will be the father for immigration purposes. So it's knowing that information first to allow you to be able to make better decisions about where to go. So it may be that going to the US, you get a US passport. I mean, some people that's a really good thing. Like, Canadian passport, US passport. These might open doors for your child later on in life, and you're able to move to come back to the UK on that passport, provided that you check that you're eligible for your parental order, and usually you would travel with a letter from your lawyer that says, yes, I've spoken to this couple. their child is born through surrogacy, they are eligible for a parental order. We're in the process of making that application now, and then once that happens, then they'll be able to sort out the British passport and things like that. So definitely international surrogacy is still going to happen, but you need to understand the nuances of the various jurisdictions before you pick one. And there'll be certain jurisdictions, so like Ukraine, you couldn't use Ukraine for same-sex, but yeah, you can in Mexico, for example, and you can in the States and Canada. So there'll be certain jurisdictions that wouldn't be open to you anyway. But there are, some people, you can't do same-sex in Georgia, and some same-sex couples still go to Georgia. And then we have to fix that on the way back. We have to sort of try and convince the court that they should still make the order, even though it actually wasn't legal in that jurisdiction. So lots of things. There are so many, as I say before, moving parts, and you're involving a lot of people and different laws in different countries, that it's not always going to be plain sailing. So the more information you have before you make that crucial decision, which is where are we going to do this, and then actually conceiving, because a lot of these issues, if you come to us beforehand, we can say, oh no, don't do that, do this instead, before conception, and then you're on the right path then. But if you come to us afterwards and say, oh, I did this, but there's already a baby, you're like, oh, okay, now I have to figure out how to fix this, and it's more difficult. So understanding that your point of conception is almost point of no return, but if you take all that advice beforehand, you'll just what's it, forewarned is forearmed, to having that information helps you make those better decisions so that you have that smoother journey. But that's not to say that if it hits the fan, you should just come to the lawyers anyway, and we'll try and figure it out.
Yeah, I hadn't even appreciated that some of these journeys where there isn't I don't know what the word is, like, so the US and Canada have got like almost an agreement when it comes to this, that the baby gets a passport, and it's quite expedited.
It's whoever is born on that soil it's not even just about surrogacy. It's if you're born on American or Canadian soil, you are American. That is their citizenship. So
whereas in other parts of the world, you're having to wait weeks or months.
Ukraine, you're not.
But and someone had said to us that in Cyprus or in Mexico or somewhere, that also was the issue. So if you're going to do it the other way, you have to make sure you're prepared to stay in a country for a very long time.
You have to understand the legal process. Understand the legal process in your jurisdiction. Understand how long it will take you to get the relevant passports, whatever, and budget for that. Budget for in country. Add an extra month, so that it's not a surprise, because often you will be there longer than you wanted to. Sometimes you'll get out quicker, and that'll be a good result. But people, you've got your newborns, all you want to do is get home, isn't it? But taking that immigration advice before conception, and before even choosing your jurisdiction. Obviously have jurisdictions in mind, because then you can take advice about it. There might be certain ones that are easier, but do your research, essentially. Do your research and try and figure out what is best for you, then take all the advice, so that you feel more confident then that in your decisions that you're making, and that you've done everything you possibly can to set yourself up for success, and then hopefully it'll be plain sailing, but if it's not, you've got a team around you to help you navigate that. But do it beforehand.
It's all a very complex, we do definitely say that, when it comes to Fran and I and our work here, we focus on the UK and independent UK based journeys. That's what we know. That's what we want to, provide the toolkit of advice for. But we know that some people will still want to go overseas and just want to point them in the right direction if that's what they choose to do. But it's clearly, super complicated. I'm not sure that the new framework's going to take over the surrogacy world in the way we thought it was going to. It'll probably help us select a few, but there's gonna, I think, be quite a few people still using the existing process if they have an overseas donor or do any part of their IVF cycle overseas. They're gonna have to stick to the old way. Wow, gosh, so much to talk about. Thank you so much for coming on, and I know we're gonna sort of sit down and find ways to work more together, particularly with the courses, and get more of your valuable input into shaping those. So
Fab.
thank you for giving us your time and
Thank
so
you.
much of your knowledge.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Hopefully we'll see you soon. Thank you for coming on.
Bye.